Hey, eighth grade, how we doing, guys? We are going to continue our discussion on the effects of the French and Indian War today and kind of what happened after the 7 Years' War and kind of how things are setting up, if you will, in the colonies. So what I want you to look at today, guys, is when we're looking at this after the French and Indian War, remember, the war was done earlier here in North America than it was, say, in Africa, Asia, Europe. And so while the war doesn't officially until 1763, it was basically all over for us by 1761. And a lot of colonies were wanting to move to that back country. They'd heard stories of fertile land. There was fur trapping. They're very eager to settle the area. But there are some issues out here. So even though the British are going to win, it's a real serious blow to the Native Americans, particularly the Ohio Valley Native Americans, your Algonquin, your Huron peoples. They had sided with the French. Remember, the Iroquois Confederacy had sided with the British, so they had won. The French allies, the Indian allies of the French, though, particularly the Huron and Algonquin, are going to really take a serious hit here. A lot of them don't have their ally. They're their main trading partner. And frankly, the British are not as good at the deals as, say, the French were. They're not as generous. So the British did a couple of things. And again, they're doing this to pay for the cost of the 7 Years' War. They raised the prices of their goods. They did not pay the Native Americans a rent for use of the land, so they lost that kind of income. And probably the most upsetting part of the whole thing to the Native Americans were the new settlements. People were moving west in Pennsylvania. They're crossing over the Appalachian Mountains. They're entering into the Ohio Valley to farm, to trap, to do all sorts of things, and to, frankly, settle the land. And like I said, the biggest insult is this idea that nobody is really talking to our, to our people and to our Native Americans. They are literally sitting there. The biggest insult is this: they are moving on without discussing it. So I just want you to kind of pick up on that. That's the biggest insult. They're very upset by this. So moving on, the reason the insults kind of build and build and build. And what happens is you have a Native American revolt. And there was a guy by the name of Pontiac. He's a chief of the Ottawa people. He lives near Detroit. And he is going to create a new alliance to take on the British. He sees that the Iroquois Confederacy was successful. He sees that they were allied with the British. And he thinks that they can do the same thing, that was their big mistake. Even though they allied with the French, they need to do something on their own. So 1763, he starts to build alliances with other tribes, the Shawnee, the Delaware, basically all of the Ohio River Valley tribes and whatnot. And within a month, Pontiac's forces, he's going to create these armies, and they're going to take over 7 British forts. So that's 7 British bases. He takes over 7 military bases, and it really catches the British off guard. Pontiac's forces, though, when they were going after the really big forts, Fort Pitt, if you remember, that's Fort Duquesne. It started the whole French and Indian War. There's Fort Niagara. These 3 forts he's unable to get. And, like with anything else, if you're not successful doing something, people are kind of going to go, eh. And the other issue is just the way the Native Americans fought. They would fight until harvest time. And then when harvest time came, a lot of the soldiers, a lot of the warriors would go home to harvest, make sure their families were getting fed for the winters and whatnot. So August of 1765, like I said, 2 of the biggest allies of Pontiac and the Ottawa people are the Shawnee and the Delaware tribes. They are beaten in a rather large battle with the British. And once they lose, that was kind of like the big ally that Pontiac had. It's really going to force Pontiac to come into, kind of look for a way to set up a peace treaty with the British. The war ends in August 1765. Pontiac had just then heard that the French had signed the Treaty of Paris. Keep in mind that the Treaty of Paris was from 1763. So it took over 2 years for that news to reach Pontiac. He really thought he was doing something to bring the French back. Part of his motivation was if they could capture these British forts, the French would come in and reinforce them. it never happened. He never understood why that wasn't happening. And then he hears about the war for the French being over for a couple of years, and he's like, well, I got no hope. I gotta figure something out. So July of 1766, what Pontiac does is he sues for peace. The British accept the surrender, and then the British do something unique. What they did was he was pardoned. In other words, he was even though he was in open rebellion against the British king, the British very shrewdly decided, hey, this guy was pretty powerful. We don't want him punished. We don't want him jailed or hurt. We want to show this as a benevolent thing. We want to set up a good fur trade. Again, the whole idea is they're trying to, pay for that 7 Years' War still. So the British pardon him, and the hope is by pardoning Pontiac, they can establish better fur trade. They can establish, a way to make more money and more trade to make money to pay for those wars. So here are some of the areas you can kind of see. Here's where Pontiac was taken over. I'm just going to highlight it a little bit more in red so you can see a little bit. But these were all places where Pontiac, captured stuff. I mean, you look at what he's able to do. He's everywhere, man. And it's really just kind of surprising that he would catch the forts, and the British so unprepared. But there he is. But the problem, the issue was he could not get the big three. The ones where he lost, the British won here. The British won, I believe it was Fort Pitt, and then Fort Niagara, and he could never get those. And if you look, that kind of creates a triangle, and that is really where that was how you could get control of Lake Erie and do a whole bunch of really cool stuff militarily. But because of what's going on, you've got he loses. The British are going to get control of those lakes again, but the British do respect him enough to kind of make some new ideas. They come up with some new ideas on how to create and stimulate trade between the British and the Native Americans, because now that the French are gone, they're trying to figure out how to make this place as profitable as possible. All right. Sorry, this is just another map I had made, kind of shows you where he took all the forts over. These were all of his allies. There's the Ojibwa, the Ottawa, the Shawnee, the Lenape, Seneca. All of these guys had allied themselves with Pontiac, and unfortunately, they just weren't unable for them for their thing. They weren't able to win. So, but that was Pontiac's war. Part of the peace treaty with Pontiac that not a lot of people talk about is the Proclamation of 1763. The British are going to do this to basically avoid more fighting with Indians. They did this as a sign of, they told the Indians it was a sign of respect, but really what it was is, if we do this, we will be able to keep trade going. And the money's made from trade. What it does is it says that the Appalachian Mountains are now the border. Now, keep in mind what they're going to say. They're going to say that the Appalachian Mountains are a temporary border, but they will now be the western border for the colonies. Now, here's the deal. If you were fighting in the French and Indian War and you have people that already moved over the thing, they're sitting there going, well, wait a minute. We thought we could go over there. We won, right? What the law does, and what the British said was, it's there to protect the colonists from Indian attacks. When Pontiac's War was going on, you had a lot of American colonists kind of say, okay, they understand this. But what it ends up doing is it creates more conflicts, because now you're limiting the movement of people. And if there's one thing that a lot of people don't like, should be able to relate to this right now with social distancing and stuff. People don't like being told they can't go somewhere. All right. And so, what this does is leads to more tension and more conflict between the colonists, especially people who had invested. You had a lot of what we call land speculation. They had basically bought land west of the Appalachian Mountains. And this becomes a real problem, because what do? Can you sell property that you're not allowed to go to? No. So here's the issue. Here's the proclamation line. The new line basically had said, nobody can go west of this line. So if you were a colonist before the war, everything, they thought this was all open. Now, after the war, the idea is, oh, you can't go there. They're like, can we go to Florida? No. They basically said this is to instill the fur trade. And I'm going to really apologize for this spelling, because my handwriting's not that good. But that's really what's happening here. This is fur trade, and it is going to be, the British are going to call it the Indian Reserve. Okay. So there you have that. So proclamation, though, told the settlers they had to move back to the Ohio Valley. If they'd moved there, it said you had to move back. Well, that's going to be really hard to do because these are not exactly wealthy people moving over the mountains and whatnot. The proclamation, like I said, also ignored land speculators. So that really angered a lot of people. So the land speculators got really angry with that. Sorry, I'm trying to get this to where we have that properly. So it told the settlers, like I said, they had to move back. That's not cool. It also told the settlers and the speculators that they couldn't get refunds. They weren't going to get their money back. And remember, the land speculators bought that from the British government. So it's kind of like, wait a minute, you sold it to us, and then we can't move people to it. What the heck? Proclamation is also going to be really hard to enforce. So it's kind of like, seatbelt tickets or texting and driving. A lot of people know it's against the law, but a lot of people, frankly, ignore that law. And that's not going to be good because then that's going to upset the British government. So nobody likes being ignored. And the British are like, or the colonists are like, this is an unfair law. We'll ignore it. And the British government's going to be like, you can't ignore it. It's the law. So even though the French and Indian War did bring a lot of peace to the colonies, it brought control and power and prestige. It really makes Britain the #1 power in the world. What I want you to remember from this is that the proclamation is really seen as the beginning of new tension between the British and the Americans. And it all starts with them being told they can't go over that border. Okay. So again, here's the line, but then this is your, like I said, the natives, or the natives, the British called this an Indian Reserve is what they said this was. And that the whole purpose of it was basically I can't spell, can I? So, but basically the idea was this was going to keep our fur trade going. And then you had other people who were living out here who had to move back across the line. No refunds. Not exactly the most fair thing I've ever heard of in my life either. So hopefully that was information that you found useful. I will talk to you at the Zoom. All right. See you soon, guys. Bye-bye.